I woke up on my 75th birthday thinking my son was taking me out to lunch. Instead, he drove me straight to a nursing home, handed the staff a suitcase with my clothes, and said, "This is where you belong now." Sitting in that sterile room, I felt the kind of pain no father should ever feel, betrayed on the very day I brought him into this world. But what Derek didn't know was that I had kept copies of every document, and I was no fool. The signatures he thought were hidden, I knew how to use them. The day he thought he'd buried me in silence was the day I began planning his downfall. So when the judge slammed the gavel, stripping him of every stolen dollar, the look on his face was worth more than any fortune. Follow my story to the end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I'll know just how far this truth travels. 75 years old today, the thought should have been a quiet comfort, maybe even a point of pride. Instead, the morning began with an emptiness that was hard to shake. The house felt quieter than usual, and though I told myself to be grateful for another year, a knot of unease sat in my chest. A simple family meal would have been enough, just sitting at a table with Derek, sharing stories of his childhood, remembering his mother. That would have been the gift I wanted. Derek showed up at my door with a smile that felt rehearsed. "Come on, Dad, let's go out for lunch. Just the two of us." His words sounded warm, but something behind his eyes didn't match. He avoided looking straight at me, his gaze darting elsewhere, as if eye contact might betray whatever he was hiding. As I pulled on my coat, memories of raising him alone came flooding back. I was still a young man when his mother died. Every night after work I cooked, cleaned, and helped him with homework, never letting him feel the absence more than he already did. I thought that devotion bound us, yet this morning, standing in the doorway, I sensed that bond thinning, almost transparent. The drive began with familiar sights: the corner grocery where I once worked overtime shifts, the ball field where Derek played Little League. Akron's spring air carried the smell of cut grass, a reminder of simpler days. I tried to relax into nostalgia, but the silence in the car pressed heavy. Derek tapped the steering wheel, checked his watch, and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "You seem in a hurry," I remarked gently. "Just making sure we get there on time," he replied, forcing a smile. His hands gripped the wheel tighter than they needed to. That's when I noticed the suitcase in the trunk. When I asked about it, he waved me off. "Work stuff. Dad, don't worry." But my stomach sank. My son had never been good at hiding things from me, and this charade was thinner than tissue paper. Still, I kept quiet. Years of patience had taught me that silence often revealed more than questions ever could. We drove past the restaurant district without slowing down. I looked out the window, confusion rising. "I thought we were getting lunch," I said. Derek cleared his throat. "Change of plans." His voice carried a certainty that chilled me. Before I could press further, the car turned into the long driveway of Silver Pines nursing home. The sign loomed ahead, clean and bright against the budding trees. My chest tightened as realization dawned. Balloons bobbed gently on the dashboard, a cheerful mockery of the betrayal unfolding. "Derek, what is this?" My voice cracked between disbelief and rising anger. He parked and shut off the engine, then turned toward me. "Dad, this is for the best. You'll be taken care of here. It's safer, more comfortable. On my birthday." The words escaped before I could stop them. The sting was unbearable, sharper than any wound. Inside, a receptionist greeted us with paperwork already waiting. My heart sank as Derek handed over documents, his signature scrawled across the bottom. "You already agreed to this, remember?" he said, eyes finally meeting mine, daring me to protest. I shook my head slowly, scanning the pages. "I never signed these. I never would." He sighed, his tone flat. "You must have forgotten. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Behind me, an orderly carried in my suitcase from the trunk. Seeing it there, neatly packed, zipped, ready, drove the knife deeper. This wasn't a sudden decision. My own son had been plotting, arranging, removing me from my life as if I were a burden he could file away. They showed me to a room that smelled of antiseptic and fresh paint. The walls were bare, the bed too neatly made. Derek lingered only long enough to pat my shoulder like a man closing a deal. Then he was gone. Alone now, I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the suitcase at my feet. The silence pressed in from every corner. How could you do this to your own father? On his birthday? The whisper trembled out, half prayer, half curse. A knock broke the stillness. A nurse stepped in, holding an envelope. Your son left instructions, she said softly. You should read them. The silence of the hallway followed me into the room, its sterile white walls greeting me with a kind of indifference that stung more than any words could. The faint smell of disinfectant lingered, mixed with the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. A nurse set the envelope Derek had left on the nightstand, as if it were just another item on a checklist. She didn't linger, only smiled politely, and left me alone with the four corners of this new cage. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, its sheets tucked too tightly, its surface foreign and unwelcoming. My reflection in the small window pane looked older than I remembered, lined not just with years but with fresh humiliation. I let my hand rest on the envelope, the paper smooth but cold, like a trap I wasn't ready to spring. For a moment, I recalled birthdays past, cakes on the kitchen table, Derek's young voice once singing off-key, a wife who used to bake chocolate pies. Now, all of that had been reduced to this envelope in the hollow silence of Silver Pines. With a heavy breath, I slid a finger under the flap and unfolded the first page. Words jumped out. Legal phrases, clauses, directives. It was written not in love but in control. All communication shall be redirected through Derek Kessler. My pulse quickened. Even my voice was to be filtered by my son. I stopped reading, pushed the paper back inside, and closed the envelope with a firmness that felt like a choice. If Derek wanted me silent, I would hold that silence in my own hands, not in his. The nurse had placed wilted flowers on the table earlier, their petals browned at the edges, a supposed gift, maybe even arranged by Derek, though they felt more like a cruel joke. I lit the small candle stuck into a cupcake the staff had left, the flame flickering weakly before sputtering out. The smoke curled upward, disappearing into the still air. And I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. A birthday flame snuffed before it had a chance to burn. Betrayal never needed fireworks. Sometimes it came disguised in something as small as a fizzled candle. Loneliness pressed in, thicker than the disinfectant smell. I reached for my phone, desperate to hear a familiar voice, but when I tried to call Leonard, an old colleague, the line didn't even ring. The nurse, when I asked, hesitated before admitting that Derek had left instructions. All calls, all letters, even visits were to be cleared by him first. My chest tightened. It wasn't just a home Derek had chosen for me. It was a prison where he held the keys. I could have shouted, I could have begged, but instead, I leaned back against the stiff pillow and stared at the ceiling. Years of fatherhood had taught me patience, of sitting in silence while storms passed. This was no different. I slipped the envelope into the drawer, untouched beyond that single page, and whispered to myself, if silence is what he wants, I'll make it my weapon. The lamp clicked off, plunging the room into a soft gray shadow. Outside. The footsteps of nurses faded into the night. My eyes adjusted to the dark, and I felt the simmer of something new. Not despair, not yet, but a quiet defiance beginning to form. You think I'm powerless, Derek? I muttered into the still air. Let's see who breaks first. That night, I slept lightly, waking off into the echo of doors closing in the corridor. But as dawn crept in through the blinds, painting the room with pale light, a knock sounded at the door. This time it wasn't just a nurse with routine instructions. A gentle voice called, Mr. Gaines? Breakfast. And with that tray came a pair of kind eyes belonging to someone who, though I didn't yet know it, would change the course of this fight. The hallway carried the soft rattle of carts and the whisper of rubber soles, but the room itself held its breath. Morning slipped through the blinds in pale slats that made the linoleum look like water. Stiffness sat in the hips and across the shoulders. the kind that makes a man measure the distance to the chair before he tries it. Breakfast waited on a rolling tray, oatmeal that had formed a skin, a banana with freckles, coffee gone timid. The quiet felt bigger than four walls. The door opened with a gentle click. A nurse stepped in, not the one from last night with brisk hands and polite eyes, but a woman whose presence settled the room instead of stirring it. She checked the vitals without hurry, glancing at the clipboard as if listening to it rather than commanding it. The name on her badge read, Cecilia Brandt. "Good morning, Mr. Gaines," she said, voice low enough to keep the morning from shattering. "How'd you sleep?" "A bed like this teaches a man which bones he owns," came the answer before pride could dress it up. She smiled a little, almost private, as if the room had heard the same line a dozen times and still enjoyed it. Instead of whisking away, she lingered by the window and drew one slat wider to invite more light. The motion sent a stripe across the sealed envelope Derek had left on the nightstand. It glowed for a moment like something under a museum lamp. Her eyes caught it. The smile thinned. "You haven't opened that," she observed. "Not yet." "You don't have to. Not today." She angled the blinds back and let the light soften. "You don't belong here, Mr. Gaines." The sentence landed quietly, but the floor seemed to steady. All night, the mind had walked circles around the same track, wearing a groove of doubt so deep it felt like truth. Hearing another voice step off that path, there was mercy in it. "Believe me," she went on, still soft. "I've seen who belongs and who's been placed." Her gaze slid to the door, then back. "And there's a difference." A long breath left the lungs without asking permission. "My son says it's for the best. Care and comfort." That was the phrase. Cecilia's mouth tugged in a way that wasn't unkind and wasn't convinced. Sometimes those words are bandages over something you're not supposed to look at. She set the tray closer and slipped a packet of sugar beside the cup. "Eat a little," she said. "You'll think better." She was halfway to the door when she stopped, turned, and nodded at the envelope again. "If it were me, I wouldn't rush. Paper has a way of becoming a kind of weather. You wait long enough, you can tell which way it's blowing." When the door closed, the room didn't feel abandoned. It felt tended. The spoon found the oatmeal, the coffee, even lukewarm, remembered how to wake a body. Outside the window, a maple wore budding tips like quiet fireworks, patient with spring. The envelope kept its place, unbreached. A small white horizon. Memories tried to stand up and argue. Times when Derek carried boxes down a flight of stairs because the knees were acting up. Afternoons when checks got shuffled and he said, "Let me handle the utilities, Dad." Online is quicker. That had felt like a kindness. It had felt like a bridge between generations, not a drawbridge being raised. Mistakes marched behind those memories. Times when pride signed without reading, or fatigue said, "Sure, son, if you say so." The ache of those moments tried to bloom into a punishing thorn. The hand that reached for guilt hesitated. Guilt is busy work. It keeps a man's hands moving so he doesn't notice the house is on fire. A knock like a fingertip. Cecilia again, face composed, eyes speaking an extra language. She shut the door with a care that made the latch a whisper. "I'm not supposed to discuss administrative matters," she said, and in that preface lived the knowledge that she might. From her pocket came 2 sheets folded to the size of a wallet photo. She laid them on the overbed table as if setting down fragile glass. "These were left on a counter this morning. Someone forgot to file them. I took a wrong turn, you could say." The corner of her mouth made a brief confession of mischief. The first sheet carried the Silver Pines letterhead. Voluntary admission. The signature at the bottom spelled a name that was mine, but not in my letters. The loops were generous, confident, the lines unshaken. My hand, these days, wore the weather of years. Weather the page did not show. The second page was a limited durable power of attorney for healthcare coordination. The language was polished within an inch of its life. All hereby authorizes and notwithstanding and to the extent permitted. Derek's name lived there in print and flourish. The witness lines bore signatures that could have belonged to ghosts. The stomach remembered how to drop. Fingers, still steady enough to tie a fly, still clever enough to fix a leaky hinge, began a small, traitorous tremor. The thought rose with a clean edge. He wants me erased on paper, too. Cecilia didn't reach for a hand or offer a tissue. She let the truth stand on its own feet. I can't advise, she said, but I can say this. Handwriting tells a story, and there are people who read that language for a living. The mind, which had been pacing all night like a dog hunting a scent, stopped circling. Vision narrowed and clarified. The years of fixing engines, balancing books, paying invoices on time had taught a habit. When something fails, trace the line back to where it still worked. Here, the line ran through pens and dates, and the way a letter bends when written by a hand with history in it. May I keep these? The voice surprised itself with its calm. You can look for a few minutes, she said, glancing at the hallway. Then, I've got to take them back where I found them, or suspicion grows legs. The documents wore their arrogance plainly. The date on the admission form sat 3 weeks behind, a day when I'd been home changing a furnace filter and coaxing the old thermostat to behave. The pen used for the signature hadn't blotted where my hands usually pause. Even the way the G curled on Gaines felt like someone guessing at my name's gate. How long have you worked here, Cecilia? The question sounded like a detour, but wasn't. 7 years, she said. Long enough to know that the paperwork doesn't always match the person. She retrieved the copies, slid them back into her pocket with the same care a Sunday school teacher gives a prayer request, and checked the door again. You're not alone in this, she added. There's a woman who volunteers with our residents, knows the law better than most, knows people better than that. If you want it, I can arrange a visit. Who is she? Marjorie Hale. A name made of straight lines and old oak. She's good. And she's not afraid to be. The room took a deeper breath. The morning shifted its weight. Yes, came out without ceremony. Please. Cecilia nodded, relief too practical to pose as joy. I'll say I invited a community liaison to discuss routine rights. That's true enough for anyone who asks. She moved to the blinds again, pinched them tighter to tame the glare. Eat what you can. Rest if you can. And if anyone tries to press you to sign anything, call me first. After she left, the envelope returned to its quiet appointment with the light. A man could open it and let the day be dictated by whatever waited inside, or he could set his watch by a different clock. The decision settled like a coin in a jar. Not yet. Let his weather blow past before it is allowed to rain in here. Late morning leaned into afternoon. A physical therapist stopped by to measure what the body could still do. The answer was plenty, if anyone bothered to ask it the right way. A volunteer arranged a vase of flowers someone else had forgotten to claim. The blooms looked like survivors. Somewhere down the hall, a radio murmured big band music. A distant room remembering when legs knew how to glide. As the sun angled west, footsteps paused at the door. Cecilia's voice, speaking to someone just outside. He's expecting you. Then the door opened, and with it entered a woman in a navy blazer and a pair of walking shoes that declared she intended to stand as long as the job required. Her hair was a calm gray, pulled back without apology. She carried a satchel that had known a table full of papers and a courtroom bench and the passenger seat of 100 cars. Mr. Gaines, she said, and let the room hear respect. I'm Marjorie Hale. Evening folded itself against the window like a heavy coat. The room hummed with the thin buzz of fluorescent light, a sound that made every second feel longer than it ought to be. The envelope with Derek's papers rode under the top drawer liner, right where it couldn't glare at me from the table. The nurse cart rattled past. Footsteps receded. A television down the hall murmured about weather over Lake Erie. Waiting can be a coward's refuge or a soldier's breath before the charge. Tonight it felt like both. The words Cecilia had left with me settled in the quiet. She knew someone who could help. Names carry weight. Help carries hope. Hope, though, makes promises your body is too old to keep without shaking. A soft knock. Cecilia slipped in, the scent of hand soap and wool from her cardigan coming with her. There was someone behind her. Short silver hair, raincoat folded over one arm, a leather portfolio under the other. "Mr. Gaines," Cecilia said, voice even. "This is Marjorie Hale." The woman's eyes moved like a carpenter's square, plain, accurate, no wasted motion. She took a seat without ceremony, opened the portfolio, and asked if she could see the papers. My fingers found them faster than my pride wanted. I hated that. She spread the sheets like a mechanic laying out parts, aligning corners, inspecting seams. A small frown appeared. "This line weight isn't yours," she said. "You sign with a heavier downstroke, consistent on the G. Here it's timid and rounded." She glanced up. "And this authorization date is 3 days before your last clinic visit, when you told staff you handled your own decisions." Trust had started feeling like a luxury I couldn't afford, but the plainness of her tone scraped rust off something inside. She didn't sell me sunshine. She measured the dark. Cecilia perched by the door, listening. "What does it mean?" The question left without bravado. "It means someone tried to pre-clear control," Marjorie said, tapping a notarization stamp. "And whoever notarized this should have verified you in person. We can test that." The portfolio swallowed the copies with a papery sigh. "I'll need to preserve evidence, request your records, and move to freeze any transfers tied to these instruments. We start now, or the trail cools." She set a card on the tray. "But this is your choice." Years ago, during the mid-shift at the tire plant, a kid on the line got his sleeve near the bead wire. Another man, quicker than fear, hit the kill switch. I remembered the look on that kid's face when he realized the machine had stopped because someone believed his life mattered. The room around me was smaller than a production floor, but the choice was the same: reach for the switch or get pulled in. "We start," I said. The words steadied in my mouth. Cecilia exhaled, something like a prayer unwinding. Marjorie outlined the first steps. "Keep communications tight. Don't alert Derek. If he called, let it go to voicemail. Document everything: times, names, the casual threats people think are harmless. And we'll need you out of here," she added, soft but firm. "Silver Pines isn't a prison, but he's treated it like one. I won't build a case while you sit under his thumb." The old instinct to apologize, for being a burden, for needing help, rose and fell back like a weak wave. "How?" She looked to Cecilia, who already had a plan. They moved through the schedule the way a good shop steward studies a roster: meal deliveries, med rounds, the 10-minute blind spot when laundry turns over. Marjorie would pull up under the service awning. Cecilia would walk me out with a chart in her hand, as if transporting a patient for tests, simple as a lie that's told to serve a truth. I slid my few things into the suitcase: socks, a framed photo of my wife and a much younger boy at Buckeye Lake, a paperback with a cracked spine. The envelope stayed on me, inside the inner pocket of a jacket that still smelled faintly of cedar hangers from home, when the overhead clock shrugged toward 9. Cecilia opened the door a sliver, listening. The hall had that brief emptiness that comes when one round finishes and the next hasn't begun. "Now," she said. We moved, me with the rolling suitcase, Cecilia with a chart and the particular briskness of a nurse on task. Each step made the linoleum click like a metronome counting out a heart rate. Past the TV room where 2 men dozed in front of a silent ball game. Past a bulletin board rimmed with forget-me-nots someone had colored in careful wobbly strokes. The automatic doors breathed us into night air. Rain oiled the parking lot, blurring the orange of sodium lamps into puddles of fire. A sedan idled under the awning. Marjorie popped the trunk. Cecilia squeezed my hand. "You call me when you're safe," she said. And for a beat, the whole world was just that grip, the steady gaze of someone who had chosen my corner. I nodded once, throat thick, sank into the passenger seat, and pulled the door shut on the humming quiet of the home. Akron slid by in streaks. Storefronts I knew by daylight looked like outtakes of my own life, The barber shop where a man once cut my hair for free after my wife's funeral. The diner with the lopsided neon egg. The church that still rang steel bells on Sundays. Wipers beat time. Fat drops thudded against glass like thrown pebbles. The suitcase thumped softly against my knee at turns. "We won't go to your house," Marjorie said, eyes steady on the road. "If someone's watching the address, I'd rather they think you're tucked in and harmless." I swallowed the taste of that word. Harmless. Some days it meant safe. Tonight it sounded like erased. We cut east toward her office, a brick building that once housed an insurance agency, now lined with framed degrees and a watercolor of the Cuyahoga in summer. She killed the headlights as we turned in. The parking lot held one other car. Lights showed in the second-story windows, too bright for after hours. Too many shadows moving behind them. The hair at my nape tightened. She parked and left the engine running a breath longer than necessary, listening. "If we're not careful," she said, voice low enough it didn't disturb the rain, "Derek will know you're gone before sunrise." The words didn't scare me so much as they scaled the moment to its size. I had walked out of the nursing home in a borrowed quiet, under a nurse's cover and a lawyer's plan, and the night had answered back that nothing stays hidden long. We crossed to the door. The glass reflected two older faces and a suitcase, then surrendered to the lobby's glow. I heard the faintest scrape upstairs, paper moving, a chair leg nudged back. My heart picked its way between ribs like someone stepping on loose boards. "Stay behind me," Marjorie said, already taking the stairs, each footfall precise, a metronome of resolve. Halfway up, the office lights flickered as if a hand had grazed a switch. A shape shifted along the frosted pane of her door. It wasn't big, but it knew where the corners were. The building smelled like wool and old toner. The suitcase felt suddenly too loud for my hand. All those years of keeping peace on a factory floor taught that you don't call out when you can see more by listening. We didn't call out. We listened. The shape stilled. The door handle clicked. The rain hadn't stopped since I'd slipped out of Silver Pines the night before, and it followed me now like an omen. Marjorie's office was small, tucked into a brick building downtown, the kind that had seen decades of storms batter its windows. The smell of wet asphalt drifted in through the cracked pane, mixing with the stale scent of old legal books. I sat across from her desk, forged papers spread between us like a battlefield map. Marjorie tapped the signatures with the tip of her pen. "Your son filed motions claiming you granted him full control of your estate. These aren't just sloppy errors. This is fraud. If a judge believes them, you'll lose everything." Her calm tone only made the words cut deeper. I studied the ink, each false curve of my name. They were meant to erase me, to write me out of my own life. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a theft of my very identity. A cold ache spread through my chest as I leaned back in the chair. For years I'd told myself Derek would eventually step up, that somewhere beneath the arrogance there was still the boy I'd raised. Yet here was proof he'd been preparing to bury me alive in paperwork. Before I could form a response, the office door rattled, then slammed open with such force the books on Marjorie's shelf trembled. Derek stormed in, rain dripping from his coat, Lynette trailing behind him. His face burned red, eyes blazing. "You ran away?" His voice cracked with fury. "You don't even know what you're doing anymore." He jabbed a finger at me as though I were some senile old fool. "You're not fit to make decisions. That's why I had to take control. I'm protecting you from yourself." The words stabbed deeper than any knife. For years I'd endured his sharp tongue, his dismissive tone, telling myself patience was a father's duty. But something inside me snapped. My hands pressed against the desk, and for the first time in years, my voice rang out, not weak or trembling, but hard as iron. "I will not be silenced by my own son." The air thickened, Marjorie watching closely, Lynette frozen between us. Derek's sneer faltered for a second, but he covered it with a laugh. "You don't know what's best for you. You never did. You're old, confused, and I'm cleaning up the mess you'd leave behind." His words echoed the disrespect I'd feared all along. But something else flickered in Lynette's eyes, a hesitation. She stood beside him, but her silence spoke louder than his shouting. Her gaze darted from me to Marjorie, and back to Derek, as though weighing truths she wasn't ready to admit. Marjorie's patience finally snapped. She slammed the papers on the desk, her voice slicing through the room. "Explain these signatures. Derek, they don't match his handwriting. Did you think no one would notice?" Derek's jaw tightened. He didn't even bother to deny it. Instead, he leaned forward, teeth clenched. "I'll fight this in court and win." "You think some old man and a volunteer lawyer can stop me? Watch me." The fury in his tone might have rattled me once. Not tonight. I straightened, looking him dead in the eye. "Then we will see each other in court, son." The word son landed like a stone between us. No warmth, no tenderness, just the bare fact of blood, stripped of love. For years I had carried the bond between us like a shield, convincing myself it could not be broken, but tonight it shattered. And what remained was war. Derek's laugh was hollow, sharp. He turned on his heel, coat flaring as he stormed toward the door. "You'll regret this," he hissed before slamming it shut. For a moment, silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. Then Lynette lingered in the doorway, eyes locked with mine. Her lips parted, voice so soft I almost thought I imagined it. "I never agreed to this." And then she was gone, footsteps fading into the rain-soaked night. Her words echoed long after the door slammed shut. By dawn, Derek had already escalated the fight, forcing me to prepare for battle. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polished wood, a place where truth and lies often collided. Sitting beside Marjorie and Trevor, I felt the weight of years pressing down on my shoulders. We had spent the morning combing through every document Derek filed, every line that could either free me or bury me alive. Dolores, my neighbor from the church, walked in holding a letter she'd kept from weeks earlier. It was simple, an invitation to a church fundraiser where I had signed my name, made notes, even joked with her in the margins. That piece of paper proved my mind was sound not long ago. She handed it over with a quiet firmness that reminded me of the community I once belonged to. For the first time in days, a spark of hope flickered inside me. Trevor, sharp-eyed and restless, leaned forward. "This could undercut Derek's claim of mental decline," he said. Marjorie nodded, her jaw set. I could see in her face the fight she carried not just for me, but for what was right. My hands trembled as I touched the church letter, the ink still bold, the memory of that night clear in my mind. I had laughed, I had sung, I had lived. That truth would now stand against Derek's poison. The courtroom session began with Derek striding in, his confidence dripping like oil on water. He glanced my way, smirking, as though the battle was already won. The judge's gavel struck, and the air turned sharp with silence. Derek's attorney rose first, a slick man with a smooth voice, holding a folder that seemed too heavy with secrets. "Your Honor," he began, "we have fresh evidence of Mr. Gaines' condition." When he held up the paper, my breath caught. A medical note. Cold words typed on a page declaring me unfit, senile, incapable of managing my own affairs. The whispers in the gallery spread like wildfire, strangers already judging me, pitying me, dismissing me. My cheeks burned, not from shame, but from the humiliation of being stripped bare in front of them. I wanted to shout, to tear that paper from his hand, but instead I pressed my palm flat against the table. Silence. I told myself, not surrender, strategy. Marjorie's hand touched my arm lightly, steadying me. When the judge asked if we had a response, she rose, her voice firm. "Yes, Your Honor. We request that our associate, Mr. Haldane, address the court." Trevor stood, young but composed, and placed two documents side by side, the supposed medical note and an authenticated sample of my doctor's handwriting. He spoke with precision, each word cutting sharper than the last. Independent analysis shows significant discrepancies. These signatures are not from the same hand. This document is forged. The room stirred. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he compared the samples. "I see. These are serious irregularities." The words echoed in me like a hymn. For weeks I had been voiceless, dismissed as weak or irrelevant. Now, through Trevor's steady tone and Marjorie's sharp preparation, the truth began to seep back into the cracks Derek had tried to cover. Derek's face flushed, his smirk collapsing into a scowl. He glared at me, rage simmering behind his eyes. I met his stare with calm, the kind that comes from decades of surviving storms. I didn't need to shout or strike. My silence, heavy and unwavering, unsettled him more than any outburst could have. As the session ended, I lingered a moment, letting the murmurs of the gallery wash past. People looked at me differently now, not as a frail old man lost in confusion, but as someone who still had fight left in him. The memories of Derek as a boy surfaced. Bedtime stories, scraped knees, the pride in his first baseball game. Those moments cut deep, but they also hardened my resolve. If he wanted war, he would have it, walking out of the courthouse. Rain clouds still hovered, but the air smelled cleaner, sharper, like a storm breaking. That was when I felt it, a folded slip of paper pressed into my hand by someone I didn't catch. My pulse quickened as I slipped it into my pocket, the paper warm against my palm like a hidden ember. Back at Marjorie's office, I opened it. In uneven handwriting, the note read, "Meet me tonight. I know what Derek really did." The words burned into me, heavier than any gavel strike. Truth was coming, darker and sharper than anything Derek had thrown so far. The air outside the diner clung heavy with grease and rain, a faint hum of neon lights buzzing overhead. The folded note had burned in my pocket all afternoon, each step to this place reminding me that whatever I was walking into could shift everything. My bones ached with the damp chill, but suspicion kept me sharp. From the far corner of the parking lot, a figure emerged. For a heartbeat, I braced for danger. Then the street lamp caught her face. Dolores Whitcomb, my neighbor from the old block. The woman who always left pies cooling on her porch back when life felt steady. "I slipped you the note," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "We don't have long." Confusion met unease in my chest. Dolores wasn't one to meddle. If she was here, it meant trouble ran deeper than gossip. I nodded, following her into the shadows where the hum of cars passing by softened our voices. Her voice trembled but didn't break. "I heard Derek. Him and Lynette. They weren't just talking about putting you in Silver Pines. They want you cut off completely, like you never existed." A coldness slid through me, sharper than the night air. Betrayal was already a knife, but hearing it aloud from someone else carved the wound deeper. Dolores pulled out an old flip phone, its scratched plastic cover glinting under the diner's lights. "I couldn't just stand by," she said. I recorded them. My hands shook as I took the phone. Her thumb pressed play, and Derek's voice filled the silence. "The old man won't last a month in there. I've got the papers signed. By the time he figures it out, he'll be nothing more than a name on a nursing home register." A chair scraped faintly in the background of the recording, followed by Lynette's nervous reply. "Are you sure no one will question it?" Derek laughed. The sound twisted, foreign. "Once the signatures are in place, he's gone. He disappears into paperwork. No one questions what's written." The words seared into me. Proof of conspiracy, spoken in his own voice. My knees nearly buckled, but I steadied myself on the diner's brick wall. Rage boiled beneath my ribs, yet I forced calm onto my face. "Keep this safe," Dolores urged, pressing the phone into my hand. "It's dangerous, but it's truth." Dangerous indeed. This recording was dynamite, and I was holding the match. Hours later, the small room I'd rented creaked under the weight of silence. Rain tapped against the single window as I slid the phone beneath a loose floorboard. My plan was forming when the door burst open without warning. Derek stormed in, Lynette trailing behind him, his face burned with fury, eyes darting over the cramped space like he owned it. Running around with lawyers, sneaking out like some rebel, his voice cracked with contempt. "You've lost your mind, old man. You're paranoid, unfit to make decisions." He paced, pointing a finger inches from my face. "If you keep this up, I'll have you declared incompetent. You'll be stripped of everything, even your right to choose what you eat." Lynette lingered by the door, arms crossed. Her lips pressed tight, but her silence cut just as deep. For a moment, her eyes softened, flickering with something like doubt, yet she stayed mute. letting Derek spit his venom unchecked. Humiliation washed over me like a flood. To be cornered in my own room by the child I had raised was a cruelty sharper than any courtroom blow, but I held my tongue. Arguing would only feed his performance. When Derek finally slammed the door behind them, leaving me alone again, I exhaled slowly. The phone beneath the floorboard pulsed in my mind like a hidden weapon. They thought me cornered, beaten into submission. In truth, they'd handed me the knife to cut their net. My hands trembled as I locked the door. Before I could breathe, the phone rang. Marjorie's voice urgent on the other end. "We need to talk tonight," she said, her tone edged with steel. "I've uncovered something that changes everything." I stared at the receiver long after the line went quiet. Exhaustion pressed heavy on my shoulders, but hope sparked at the edge of despair. Whatever she had found could be the turn of the tide. The drive to Derek's house felt like a march into enemy territory. The November air was brittle, leaves clinging stubbornly to the bare trees that lined the suburban streets. Inside the car, silence weighed heavy, every turn of the wheel pushing me closer to a confrontation I knew was designed to break me. Derek had insisted we meet as a family. I knew better. It wasn't about healing wounds. It was about tightening the noose. When I stepped into his living room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Lynette hovered near the kitchen doorway, avoiding my eyes, while Caleb sat cross-legged on the rug with a toy car, too young to understand the storm swirling around him. Derek stood tall in the center of the room, jaw clenched, as if the house itself answered to him. Every detail, the neatly arranged furniture, the scent of polished wood, felt staged, as though even the setting had been conscripted for his theater. "Dad," Derek began, voice sharp. "This is long overdue." His words struck like cold steel. He accused me of failing to manage my finances, of losing touch with reality, of putting the family's future at risk. Each word was carefully chosen to humiliate. Lynette, reluctant but loyal to her role, added her support in a soft tone. Maybe Derek's right. Maybe it's time you let go." Her eyes darted toward me, guilt flickering before she looked away. I sat in silence for a beat, letting the weight of their accusations fill the room. Then I raised my head. "You call this a discussion? It feels more like a sentencing." My voice was steady, not loud, but it cut through Derek's performance. He bristled, anger flashing in his eyes, because I hadn't played my part. I hadn't cowered. Caleb, innocent in his youth, piped up without looking away from his toy. "Daddy, you said the papers had to be signed fast, or Grandpa might change his mind." The toy car scraped across the hardwood as silence swallowed the room. Derek froze, face pale, then flushed red with rage. Lynette's head snapped toward him, confusion written across her features. For me, Caleb's words were like a lantern in the dark, proof that the shadows held truth. I leaned forward, fixing Derek with a look. Out of the mouths of children, "Derek, you've just been undone by your own son." The door creaked open before he could respond. Dolores Whitcomb, my old neighbor, stepped inside, her coat still dusted with the chill of evening air. She carried herself with quiet resolve, and her presence shifted the ground beneath Derek's feet. "I wasn't sure I'd have the courage," she admitted, "but I saw you. Derek, I saw you meeting a notary outside your father's house after midnight. Don't deny it." The words landed like a hammer. Derek spun toward her, spitting venom. "You think anyone will believe a nosy old neighbor? This is a circus, orchestrated by a man who can't admit he's losing his mind." I rose to my feet. My voice, calm but edged with iron, filled the room. "Enough. This is no circus. It's your reckoning." The argument exploded. Shouts volleyed back and forth, Derek's fury colliding with my refusal to yield. Lynette wavered, torn between loyalty and doubt, her face pale in the firelight. Caleb cowered behind the couch, frightened by voices too loud, too raw. And then Marjorie Hale arrived, stepping into the chaos with a stack of papers and a resolve that steadied me. "Stop this!" she commanded, her voice ringing through the room. She moved to my side, laying down the legal weight of her presence. Derek sneered. but his eyes betrayed unease. He threatened lawsuits, claimed victory was inevitable, swore he would bury me in court. His words spilled like poison, but I stood unmoved. "This ends tomorrow," I said, my tone low but unwavering. From inside my coat, I pulled an envelope and slammed it onto the table. The sound reverberated in the stunned silence. "In here lies the truth you've tried so hard to bury, and tomorrow the world will see it." No one moved. Lynette's lips parted, but no sound came. Caleb peeked from behind the couch, wide-eyed. Dolores crossed her arms, watching Derek with quiet triumph, and Marjorie stood firm at my side. I looked straight into my son's eyes, not with anger, but with finality. Tomorrow, everything changes. The room fell silent, the tension coiling into a stillness that was louder than any argument. For the first time, Derek had no words. The courthouse air was thick, stale with tension and whispers that carried like smoke. After the storm at Derek's house, I thought there might be some space to breathe, but instead I found myself standing under brighter lights, with more eyes watching, judging. The silence after our confrontation still lingered, heavy as a stone in my chest. Derek hadn't spoken to me since that night. He had stormed out, face twisted in anger, and in the days that followed, he avoided me as if my very presence was poison. Lynette, though, seemed quieter. She moved differently around him, her eyes darting away when his voice grew sharp. Once, in the hallway, she offered me the faintest nod, a wordless sign that she saw more than she admitted. Caleb was the only one who dared to break the silence. The boy sat beside me on the courthouse bench that morning, swinging his legs nervously. His voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear. "Grandpa, are you going to be okay?" That simple question hit deeper than any accusation. I squeezed his hand, nodding without words. His small fingers wrapped around mine with surprising strength, planting something in me I thought I'd lost. The hope that maybe the chain of betrayal could still be broken in the next generation. When the judge called our case, the quiet dignity of the room cracked like glass. Derek rose with theatrical force, his attorney at his side, and filed his petition with venom dripping from every word. He didn't just claim I was old. He painted me as incompetent, delusional, unfit to handle my own name, my own breath. "This man," Derek declared, voice booming so it echoed off the wooden walls, "is clinging to pride while losing his grip on reality. He cannot manage finances, cannot make rational choices. He is, simply put, a danger to his own well-being." The gallery murmured. I heard whispers. Old fool. Senile. Stubborn. The sting of humiliation was worse than the petition itself. I wanted to shout, to slam the truth into every smirking face, but I stayed still. My silence was not weakness, it was my shield. I met Derek's glare and held it without blinking. If he wanted me to break, he would not have the satisfaction. The judge scribbled notes, his expression unreadable. Each word Derek threw was meant to bury me deeper, to strip away not just my dignity, but my existence as a man. Yet even in the storm, I could feel Marjorie at my side, steady as stone, her file thick with truths that would not remain buried. And then, like lightning splitting a storm, the tide shifted. Marjorie rose, her voice calm but cutting. She called Trevor forward. The young attorney's nervousness masked by his firm grip on the folder he carried. He laid the documents on the judge's bench. "Your Honor, what Mr. Kessler omits is more telling than what he states. We have traced funds from Orville Gaines's estate into accounts registered under Derek Kessler's control, shell accounts, false names, transfers designed to conceal theft." The courtroom gasped as Trevor pointed out line after line, signatures that didn't belong to me, accounts I had never touched. The neat handwriting of deceit stood in stark contrast to my trembling, aging script. For the first time, Derek's confidence faltered. His face went pale, and his eyes flicked toward Lynette. She sat stiffly in her seat, lips pressed tight, but the color drained from her cheeks. She saw it too, the lies he had wrapped her in, the web that now threatened to choke them both. The judge leaned back, frowning deeply. "This court requires a deeper investigation. These allegations are serious. Until further review, No decision will be made regarding Mr. Gaines's competency. It wasn't victory, but it was a crack in Derek's armor. And cracks, I knew, had a way of spreading. After the hearing, I sat quietly, the wooden bench pressing hard against my back, the weight of it all, my son's venom, the whispers of strangers, the fracture of my family, poured over me. Caleb's eyes were wet, his confusion laid bare, and I hated that he carried even a fraction of this burden. Yet pride swelled in me too. I had not bowed. If this battle costs me everything, I thought, let it at least save him. Let him see that a man does not surrender his name, his truth, without a fight. The courthouse emptied, echoes of footsteps fading down the hall. I was about to rise when I felt the faint brush of paper against my hand. Lynette's fingers slid it across the bench, quick and silent. She didn't look at me, only whispered under her breath, "You'll need this." When I unfolded it later, my breath caught. Rows of banking details, account numbers, transactions. At the bottom, in her hurried scrawl, a single line. "Derek won't stop until one of you is destroyed." The paper burned hot in my palm, not from the ink but from the truth it carried. Proof of his betrayal. Proof that the next step would shatter whatever pieces of family we had left. The paper Lynette slipped into my hand felt heavier than stone. Back in Marjorie's office, the blinds drawn tight against the gray Ohio sky, we spread out the documents across her desk. Each line, each figure, told the story of betrayal in cold print, shell companies, names I didn't recognize, money drained through channels I had never heard of. It wasn't just mismanagement, it was theft dressed in legal clothing. Marjorie tapped her pen against the page. "This is enough to bury him," she said, her tone flat but firm. "If the judge accepts it, Derek's entire narrative collapses." The word bury twisted in my chest. I had never wanted to destroy my son, only to reach him, but the path he had chosen left me no mercy to extend. Caleb stood in the doorway, pale, his small hands gripping the frame. He must have overheard enough. His eyes darted from me to the papers. "Grandpa, is Dad stealing from you?" His voice cracked, fragile in the heavy room. The question lanced deeper than any ledger could. I couldn't bring myself to say yes. Silence was my answer, and the way Caleb's shoulders slumped told me he understood. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and old wood, the benches creaking as people filled the gallery. Rain streaked the tall windows, each drop echoing the tension in my chest. Derek sat across the aisle, jaw tight, eyes flashing with the fury of a cornered man. Lynette kept her distance, her gaze fixed on the floor. When the judge called the case, Marjorie rose. She carried the folder Lynette had given us, her steps steady. One by one, she laid out the trail of numbers. "Your Honor, the funds meant for Mr. Gaines's care were siphoned into personal accounts controlled by his son, Derek Kessler. Here are the transfers. Here are the companies. And here are the signatures authorizing it." Derek shot to his feet. "Lies!" His voice cracked, loud enough to rattle the rafters. He pointed at me, his finger trembling. "This old man doesn't know what day it is. He's a manipulative relic clinging to money he can't even use." The judge slammed the gavel. Order. But Derek was unraveling, each word tearing apart the mask he had worn so carefully. Whispers rippled through the gallery, his face flushed crimson, his fists clenching as if rage could erase the evidence. Watching him collapse so publicly was a punishment I had never wished for. Yet it unfolded anyway. The sound that broke the courtroom wasn't the gavel, it was Caleb's cry. He rushed forward, his small voice piercing the charged silence. "Why would you do this to Grandpa?" Tears streaked his cheeks. His words a knife sharper than any lawyer's argument. Derek froze. His mouth opened, then shut again. No excuse finding purchase. Rage twisted his features. But behind it, I saw something hollow, emptiness where love should have lived. Lynette pulled Caleb close, shielding him from Derek's glare. She didn't speak, but her arm around her son spoke enough. In that moment, I knew the tide had shifted. She was no longer his silent partner. She was a mother protecting her child, even if it meant stepping out of Derek's shadow. The judge leaned forward, voice measured. Given the severity of these allegations and the evidence presented, the court will order a full investigation. Until then, Mr. Kessler, you are prohibited from accessing or managing your father's estate. Derek collapsed back into his chair, fury simmering in his silence. As the crowd thinned and the echoes of footsteps faded, I remained seated, staring at the empty bench where Derek had sat moments earlier. My heart ached. Not with defeat, but with the bitter knowledge that family bonds had been burned to ash. Money, I realized, had never been the point. Dignity was standing here, still myself in the eyes of the law. I had defended it. I could live poor, I whispered under my breath, but I will not die humiliated. Caleb's small hand slipped into mine, his grip warm, steady. That touch was worth more than every dollar siphoned through Derek's schemes. Outside, the autumn air bit cold against my cheeks. Marjorie caught up with me, her voice low. This isn't finished. Derek still has allies. He won't let this fall alone. Across the courthouse steps, Derek stood with a man in a dark suit, his words sharp, his gestures frantic. The stranger's face was half-shadowed, but the way they leaned together, heads bent, sent a chill through me. This battle wasn't just about father and son anymore. Something larger loomed, and I could feel its weight pressing down. I walked away, the courthouse fading behind me, the note of warning in Marjorie's voice clinging tighter than the chill wind. The courthouse emptied the way a storm drains from the sky, fast at first, then in rivulets that glisten and linger. Fluorescent lights hummed above the tiled corridor, a sound that made thoughts feel thin. Shoes squeaked, doors thudded, and the air tasted of paper and coffee. Victory, if that's what this was, didn't arrive with trumpets. It settled like a coat after a long winter, serviceable, not warm. Marjorie touched my elbow and guided me toward a bench along the wall. Her voice dropped to something steady. The judge has enough to keep jurisdiction, she said. Trevor will file the amended motion in the morning. The handwriting analysis, the bank trail, none of that disappears now. She searched my face for relief and found only a kind of spent quiet. Years of watching a son grow into the shape of a stranger dulls celebration. It turns even good news into a soft ache. Across the corridor, Lynette stood with Caleb near a water fountain. The boy's shoulders were rounded, his eyes shining with the kind of effort kids make when they refuse to cry in public. Lynette smoothed his hair with a trembling palm, not looking at me, not looking at anyone for too long. A family still existed there. In the cracked way a plate continues to exist after it's dropped, edges touching, lines running like rivers. Marjorie gathered files and gave a gentle nod toward the exit. Go home. Rest, she said. I'll call when the judge's clerk posts the hearing date. Rest sounded like a word from an old language. The bench pressed hard against aging hips. Tiredness folded over bones that once worked swinging shifts without complaint. Hands that had learned to be steady in a factory now shook when tying a simple knot. A shout split the corridor. You. The sound carried anger like glass carries light, sharp and focused. Derek strode toward us, face red, jaw wild. People turned but didn't interfere. He had always commanded volume. Today he commanded spectacle. You did this, he spat, pointing a finger that used to ask for help with math, for a ride to practice, for a few dollars, and a pat on the shoulder. You paraded lies and dragged my name through the mud. Marjorie stepped forward, calm as stone. Mr. Kessler, this is not the place. He ignored her. Every step pounded the tile. After everything His voice caught on the word did, as if it finally understood its own weight. You ruined my life. It rang down the corridor like something metal thrown against a wall. Caleb flinched. Lynette put an arm around him, firm now, not pleading. Derek, she said, a small warning wrapped in his name. Anger had already chosen its direction. Reason couldn't reach it. He jabbed the air again. You should have stayed where you were, he said, voice lowering into something cold. It was best for everyone. The hallway showed us like a mirror we hadn't consented to stand before. An old man rooted to a bench, a son whose pride outran his judgment, a woman calculating safety in real time, a boy learning what not to become. Enough, Marjorie said, not loud, but final. Any further comments belong in pleadings, not in public scenes. For a heartbeat, Derek looked smaller. Then he tore his gaze away, muttering, and shouldered through the doors. The glass shuddered behind him. Lynette didn't follow. That choice, simple, unannounced, felt louder than his shouting had. She walked over with Caleb. The boy's quiet hit harder than any words. "He'll be okay," he said to himself more than to me, and wiped at his cheeks with the back of his hand as though erasing a mistake. Lynette spoke without ceremony. "I'm sorry," she said. The apology didn't seek absolution, it offered truth. "I believed what I wanted because it was easier. I didn't ask questions when I should have. That's on me." Her eyes were tired in the way that comes from months of bargaining with your own conscience. "I'm taking Caleb home to my sister tonight. We need distance." No lecture rose to meet her. Blame is a stone that, once thrown, rarely hits the target it aims for. "Take care of him," was all that came. She nodded, relief passing over her face like a breeze over water. Caleb stepped closer. "Can I come by this weekend?" he asked. There was fear behind the question, a boy's measure of permission. "Maybe help with the yard. Mom says the leaves are bad this time of year." Pretending normal is its own mercy. "That'd be good," I said. His small grin flashed like sunlight. He hugged me, a fierce, brief clutch, and the air changed in my chest. Some things, when broken, reveal an inner grain you wouldn't have noticed otherwise. Marjorie returned with Trevor, their arms full of binders. "We'll call," she said. "Keep your phone close, but don't wait by it." Good advice for more than law. We separated at the steps, each of us shouldering a share of the day's weight. The evening gathered early, as it does in late fall. Side streets carried the smell of damp leaves. Porch lights blinked on one by one like cautious stars. Home looked the same from the outside. The porch swing, a pair of cracked clay pots, the welcome mat that had never learned to do its job. Inside, the silence felt earned. Kettle on, old chair, familiar creak. Photos lined the bookshelf. A wedding day grin, a toothless toddler in a Halloween pumpkin, a Little League uniform too big for the boy inside it. The glass reflected a thinner man than memory kept. Age teaches the discipline of inventory. What remains matters more than what's gone. The first sip of tea warmed the hands more than it warmed the mouth. Knuckles remembered wrenches and winter. Some prayers don't reach words, a few do. Let him find his way. Let the boy keep his kindness. Keep me from mistaking punishment for justice. The house answered with the faint tick of a clock and the soft sigh of settling wood. A car slowed out front. Headlights brushed the living room walls. Footsteps on the porch board stopped at the door. The letter slid under with a whisper like a match being struck. Adrenaline has a smell, metallic, electric. The envelope had no return address, just my name printed in a hand I knew better than my own. The loop of the G, the slant of the S, the way the R always leaned too far forward. Paper held the temperature of the air, cold. The message inside was one line, written without flourish. "This isn't finished." Fingers flattened the paper against the table until the grain pushed back. Anger arrived first, fast and bright. Then something else, sorrow. A deep-water current that moved everything in the room a fraction of an inch. Words to a father from a son who had forgotten how to be one. Not a threat worth feeding, but not a note to ignore. The letter went into the drawer with the old birthday cards and the spare keys. A place for things that prove what happened. Phone light glowed on the counter. A text from Marjorie landed. Received another email from the clerk. "I'll call at 8. Rest if you can." The impulse to answer with bravado passed. Courage that needs witnesses is often just costume. A simple, "thank you, will do," was enough. Tea cooled. The house grew smaller around the small lamp in the corner. On the bookshelf, a photograph of Derek at 10 caught the light, gap-toothed, elbow on a bat, confidence bright as summer. Love doesn't vanish when it's mistreated. It hardens into a responsibility to stop harm, to set boundaries, to refuse to accept the lie that blood excuses everything. The judge would sort evidence. The lawyers would file motions. Between those efforts fell a father's job no court could handle. Choose a future that did not make room for abuse, even if that future meant walking alone for a stretch. Wind tapped branches against the window. The clock ticked the same tick it had offered on better nights. Sleep would come because morning would come, and morning carried tasks that did not care about broken hearts, trash to the curb, bills in the mail, leaves to rake. Here was the lesson the years had rubbed smooth enough to hold. Peace doesn't always mean repair. Sometimes it means standing, unbent, in a quiet room and knowing you didn't let yourself be erased. The letter still lay there in the drawer, a line of ink like a challenge scratched into bark. Not finished. No. But neither was the work of telling the truth, of protecting what kindness remained, of teaching a boy that men can be better than their rage. The kettle clicked again as it cooled, a small sound in a small house that, for tonight, felt safe enough. The courthouse loomed gray under the early morning sky, its stone facade cold yet oddly reassuring. I clutched the folder Marjorie had prepared, filled with Lynette's documents and Trevor's careful analysis. My body felt heavier than it had in years, yet inside there was a strange calm. This was not the trembling fear of an old man abandoned. This was the steadiness of someone who had walked through fire and decided to keep standing. Inside the courtroom, the air buzzed with whispers. Reporters filled the back benches. Neighbors from my church sat along the sides, and even strangers leaned forward, eager to see the outcome of a father and son turned enemies. Derek sat just a few rows away, his jaw tight, eyes darting around the room like a man already sensing the walls closing in. Lynette sat apart from him, Caleb's small hand clasped in hers. For the first time, I noticed she no longer wore her wedding ring. Marjorie stood with quiet authority, presenting the bank statements, notarized records, and the analysis of forged signatures. Every page felt like another stone laid on Derek's shoulders. Trevor explained the trail of shell accounts. Money siphoned in Derek's name while my health and dignity had been used as excuses. With each detail, the judge's face hardened. Then it came, the turning point I had waited for. The judge leaned forward, voice steady but cold. Mr. Kessler, the evidence is overwhelming. You exploited forged documents, diverted assets, and attempted to strip your father of his legal rights. This court strips you of any financial authority over your father. Furthermore, your actions will be referred to the state attorney for possible criminal charges. The room fell into a stunned hush. Derek's chair screeched against the floor as he shot to his feet, his voice cracked with rage. You all think you can ruin me? This is my family, my legacy. His words turned to a raw scream as officers moved in. Caleb buried his face against Lynette's side, sobbing as Derek shouted betrayal at everyone in the room. Finally, they dragged him out, his voice fading down the hall like a man swallowed by his own fury. Silence followed, broken only by the gavel's sharp strike. I sat back, breath shallow, and felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't triumph, not really. It was release. When the hearing ended, Lynette rose slowly. Her voice wavered but carried strength I hadn't heard before. I can't stand beside him any longer, she said, glancing at me, then down at Caleb. I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry. Orville. Caleb ran to me, wrapping his arms around my waist. His words came muffled through tears. Grandpa, can I live with you more? I don't want to be with Dad when he's like that. My knees nearly buckled at the weight of that small embrace. In that moment, wealth, property, all the things Derek had twisted himself into knots over, seemed pale compared to the warmth of that boy's arms. Later that evening, I sat in my modest home. The walls felt quiet, filled only with the soft ticking of the clock and the faint hum of the kettle on the stove. On the table sat a framed photograph of my late wife. Her smile held the same softness Caleb carried. I touched the frame gently. "We didn't raise him to betray us," I whispered. "But I've taught our grandson to stand for truth. That will have to be enough." Peace doesn't come from fixing every broken bond. It comes from knowing I refuse to let my name, my life, be erased by lies. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I had defended who I was, even when my own blood tried to strip it away. As I leaned back, the sound of Caleb's laughter drifted in from the kitchen where Lynette was preparing tea. For the first time in years, my home felt alive again. In the end, I didn't just become a millionaire in money. I became rich in truth, in dignity, and in the love of those who still believe in family. The true wealth we leave behind is not measured in dollars, but in the respect, truth, and love we teach our children to carry forward.